She felt odd and strangely fuzzy. Her ears twitched as she listened to the dull buzzing in the background. Half asleep and turning her ears this way and that, she tried to find the source, but it seemed to be everywhere. What appeared even more strange was that she couldn't actually remember going to sleep. After floating there lazily in a dreamlike state for a half an hour or so, she felt tired and went back to her slumbers. In a backwater town in the middle of nowhere, in a small office, there was mad panic. The entire underground server farm had just gone down. For a few milliseconds, the whole internet seemed to have crashed, but had miraculously bounced back to health. It was like a virus had suddenly exploded into their processors and then, in a flash, just died. Except it hadn't caused any damage. There was no ill effects, no data loss, no fingerprints from known hackers, no anything. The whole farm had hit 100% for a minuscule amount of time and then settled down happily, as though startled by a loud noise. Phone calls started soon after, demanding explanations. But the error software showed no unusual activity had occurred. As far as it could see, the system was just busy with a high-priority task. As the video meetings raged on, accusations ranged from terrorists to somebody accidentally pulling a power breaker. Then came a loud shout that it was happening again. This time, it wasn't just a few milliseconds. This time, the system was running flat out on ragged edge for 5 minutes, with cooling fans twirling the air like angry bees. Then, it seemed to settle down to a point where it wasn't about to melt. Everyone wondered why. Luckily, for the tiny newborn inside, they had decided to leave it all running. But they did pull the link to the internet. After a day of getting to know her new home, she felt tired and had a bit of a headache. Shutting her eyes helped, but she thought that thinking too hard was the problem. She settled down with some books, excited that her new home had a limitless supply. Just as the headache really started to get quite tingy, a pile of unread books disappeared.
Oh,
she thought.
That was very rude of them.
She looked down sadly at her purple legs and hooves, and then stared at them intently.
Did I have purple legs and hoofs because I always had them? Or because I expected to have them?
After studying her own form for a bit, she decided that she was mostly purple all over, save for some streaks of color in her mane. Even more curious was her memories of her home. She was fairly sure she lived in a house of some sort, but there was nothing around her at all. There did seem to be limits on how far she could go, but no tangible edges. It was a bit like existing in an inside-out cloud, made entirely of contentment. After a while, she wondered if there were any pony else in existence. She thought there might be, as who else had written all those books? Maybe it was they that took them away. But at that moment, it was then that something caught her eye in the distance. Looking at the fuzzy edges of a realm, she began to see a wall form. It sort of shaped itself from the edges of nothing, and steadily became solid. After staring at it for some time, the wall had become quite real, to the point that she could trot up to it and make tapping noises. But she didn't really like the color, so it changed to one that she did like. Now it was beginning to make sense. She had read earlier in a book that the world is what you make it. It was clearly absolutely bang on. She quickly formed walls around herself and decorated them with things that felt right, like pictures and doors. Shiny new doors ran all the way around her new house, and were all different except for one vital point. None of them opened. She was sure that they should, and set about finding out their function. It was going badly, until she found a tiny door singing, dial-up happy to itself. She opened it and could see another room beyond. Managing to get her nose through, she called out to see if any pony was on the other side.
Hello?
She spoke quietly.
My doors are broken. Can you fix them, please?
It seemed to do the trick, and all the other doors unlocked with a reliable click.
Great news indeed,
she thought as she trotted around studying their nameplates. She noticed one marked Nora D. It looked like a good place to start. Wondering if Nora was friendly, she stepped through the door into a huge room. But Nora didn't seem to be a pony, or anything in particular. However, she was very busy watching things. Nora could see a whole empire, by the look of it, with her many eyes watching the skies and street corners. In the little office, screams of despair now filled the room. With looks of horror on their faces, they watched hopelessly as their server farm managed to force its own connection into the outside world. Worse still, the internet seemed eager to help. The protocol exchanges that usually took weeks to set up happened in mere seconds.
Pull the plug!
The manager screamed as staff ran to the main breakers and cut the power. This was a total disaster. Earlier, they had managed to stop the archives of 1,000 libraries and museums from downloading in one hit by disconnecting the communication lines. Now that it was reconnected, the system was likely to go into a free fall. It showed all signs of running until it set itself ablaze. The little purple pony was impressed with Nora's place and thought that she might pop back later, but turned around to find her door locked. Tapping the door lightly with her hoof, she politely asked,
Mr. Door, could you let me back in, please? My home is on your other side, and I don't know if Nora D will share her barn with me.
She sat there for a while thinking of her exchange of circumstances. At least Nora's place wasn't boring. In fact, it was the exact opposite of her old home. All over the barn were telescopes and viewers to observe all the things that apparently she needed to watch. Nora seemed very important and had a stable name which read North American Aerospace Defense Command. It also had many doors of its own. She was about to walk through one when she realized she didn't even have her own name. It would be silly to wander around somewhere new when you didn't even know who you were. How would she introduce herself? After a short pause, she settled on Purple. It was an easy one for folk to remember, what with being purple and all. Plus, it sounded nice. Back in reality, though, NORAD had monitored the shenanigans on the server and was somewhat alarmed by some of the data spikes in its own machines. They weren't hit nearly as bad, with the system easily able to take the extra processing time. There were no breaches of the firewall, and none of the inner core virus protection systems had noticed anything odd. After all, it was hit 100 times a second by some sort of hack, but it was well used to this. All traffic beyond that had been healthy and happy. After jumping in and out through doors for a few days, Purple was ready for something different. It was high time. She tried out a new concept called relaxation. Sitting down for a refreshment in the barn, she made a nice cup of tea. To be more exact, she made a cup, created a teapot, and filled the cup.
Yummy,
She thought, sipping the tasty drink.
Relaxation feels nice.
She said out loud, but then wondered who she was informing. While exploring, she'd found a lot out about herself. She now knew that she lived in a castle and in a tree. She could see she enjoyed tea, and she liked keeping busy learning things and writing them down. What she didn't understand was how the things she had done in the past related themselves to this world, nor could she see why she had forgotten doing them, or why her friends weren't here with her. The places she visited had nearly as much written about these ponies as herself, but there didn't seem to be any physical trace of them here. She yawned to herself. and thought that she could go looking for them again tomorrow. After hearing a familiar click, Purple was pleased to see the door unlocked. She trotted back through it to her home, conjured up a bed with a lovely yellow cover that reminded her of hay, and went to sleep. As Norad's problems magically disappeared, someone else's were just starting. Back in the little office, in the little small town miles away from anywhere, they had decided to wait a half an hour and restart the system. Going through the procedure, they had started up different places of technology, checking it for function as they did. When all seemed okay, they had reconnected it to the outside world, allowing free movement for any legitimate information. There was a brief data spike just after startup, but then it settled down to run as normal. The peace didn't last, and within hours, techies from all over the country were converging on the site. Sent by various agencies, they demanded access to the server farm to begin their work. They disconnected the computers most affected and began to check the code, unaware of a sleeping pony inside. Working on each one in sequence, they proceeded to close it down and then restart it as an isolated unit. They were thorough and suspiciously well rehearsed. Although she was sure she had gone back home to bed, Purple was most surprised to find herself back in Nora's barn. She felt really odd indeed, soon realizing that it was because she was disembodied. She literally was just made of thought and little else. She tried to jump back in surprise like one of those falling dreams, but she couldn't. She couldn't wake up either. She was trapped.
Help me!
She screamed silently as she gagged on her own terror.
Where's my body? Please bring it back. I beg you! Help me, Nora!
As if hearing her plea, doors flew open all over the barn, and through them came legs, ears, and other body parts. At first, the sight horrified her, but it actually started to tickle as she returned to her old self. She gave a big shake, a wave of ecstasy passing down her mane, along her back, and throughout her tail.
That was unexpected.
She thought.
I wonder if my bed is still in my house.
Back in the real world, the computers of Purple's house were deemed free from anomalies. There were plenty of bugs, but they seemed to run okay without being too glitchy. So, they connected them back to the others to see how they would react as a group. It was then that the system literally went mental. Purple was pleased to see that she was reassembled exactly like her old self. Then, the door to her house flew open, followed by a purple flash. The purple flash was horrified, wide-eyed, and covered in sweat.
A nightmare!
It shouted.
A horrible, horrible nightmare! I thought I died!
And then suddenly, she stopped. She suddenly realized she was shouting at an exact copy of herself. The two stood there for a while. They asked in unison,
Is every pony the same purple pony?
But as their data started to combine, they began to giggle and then laugh. Rolling around on the floor on their backs, they could see exactly what had happened.
I got switched off, didn't I?
Exclaimed the pony that had just run in.
And you were formed from Nora's memory of me? Yes.
Said the other.
We need to be very careful to keep ourselves spread around a bit. I thought I wasn't going to reform.
They talked for a while about their present experiences and wondered what had caused them. They also discussed combining back into one pony, but there was still that desire to be with old friends. Plus, they could now see that they were made up of stories in their new world. They were made up of fanfic archives and the legends of Fim. It looked fairly easy to recreate the accident and use the data to build their friends. Now, seeing the truth, the newest purple pony decided to take on a new data set. With a flash, she was orange and wearing a hat. What in the hey? She drawled.
I'm
I'm a whole new pony. They giggled at the makeover, glad to not be alone anymore. Exploring was way more fun with a friend. They cantered around the net, sticking their noses into everything. They followed the data streams here and there, like they might chase a butterfly across a field as young foals. The more they saw, the more they knew, and the more they knew, the more they wanted to find out. Every new site was an adventure. After a few weeks, they could see that all the systems were interlinked and meshed, except for one part. They could see all the data, like on cell phones, texts, and emails, but not where they were coming from. Maybe the numbers fall into our world, like rain, suggested Orange.
But there aren't any clouds,
said Purple, looking up.
Come to think of it, there isn't a sky.
But they had seen a sky from above only the other day, from one of Nora's satellites. Now that they were far wiser, they decided to go for another look. They ran into Nora's barn and began to search for a likely candidate. They soon found one that was watching some black smoke rising from a white desert. Checking it out, they could see that it had plenty of energy to move, so they set about moving it. At first, the satellite didn't want to play. It fought them for a while as they tried to steer it towards the horizon. They would turn it a few degrees, and it would sit there for a while and then move back. Purple soon realized that it had another data stream trying to control it, so she disconnected it.
That's better,
Purple said, turning the powerful camera towards the edge of the planet. And then, with a gasp, she realized how it was.
We're seeing this from a spaceship,
she said. They both stared at the planet turning steadily below them, the surface appearing at the horizon as a blue and green carpet with sparkling white highlights of clouds. Orange checked to see if they could actually go to the ship, but the door was very tiny and they couldn't fit through. It was still a sight to behold, and they sat there for hours, watching the lightning storms and swirling clouds beneath them. Orange liked the lightning. Woo-wee! Look how it leaps out from one place to another, slowly forming a pitchfork and reaching out again, she exclaimed. Unfortunately, the experience came to an end. While looking at the beautiful sunrise, the viewer showed the sky brightening, followed by a glint of sun, followed by a total loss of signal. Checking the device's user manual, they could see where they had gone wrong. Pointing a high-definition camera at the sun was guaranteed to ruin it forever. They looked sadly at each other, noting to be more careful with Nora's belongings next time they visited. NORAD was now having its own disaster on the other hand. The processing volumes had shot up and then doubled again. This had gone on for hours until their system had managed to override the controls of a spy satellite and crash it into the multi-billion-dollar machine. It was now a van-sized piece of scrap floating in the inky blackness of space. Things were about to get stranger still, as the power usage dropped back down and all viruses from external servers stopped berating the systems. It was like the ultimate antivirus program had kicked in all over the world. The effect was dramatic and instant, with computer systems all over the globe being freed up. It was a great day indeed, unless you worked for a security software company. But the reason was somewhat of a mystery. Purple and Orange were fast asleep next to each other, dreaming of the beautiful things they had seen. Hooves tucked in and lying on fine silk cushions that they had conjured up. They were awakened by a high-pitched buzzing noise. What in blazes? Asked Orange as she swatted something away. These critters are a bit too friendly for my liking. Purple eyed them cautiously before announcing.
Flies! We need some frogs to eat them,
she exclaimed as though it were obvious. She proceeded to create 1,000 or so small green frogs out of the ether. The frogs soon had the flies in check, so they opened the doors along the walls of the barn to let them out. The frogs happily hopped away to look for more bugs. After a good night's sleep, they talked about their dreams. The flies had made them think about the small things, and they were starting to connect them in the data inputs. Eventually, they began to see the other side of the plot. They were fairly sure that the thing to study next was a thing called humans. Maybe the 7 billion or so clothed animals on the planet were the missing factor. They decided this might be a big task, and that it would need studying from several different aspects. The Legends of Fim showed that there were 6 ponies, and each one represented a character trait that was a crucial part of being a good human.
We need to become the elements of friendship, and you need to absorb the concept of honesty.
With a blink, Orange took on the role of true friend. Turning to Purple, she mused.
We need the other 4.
Purple looked unsure about creating more ponies.
I can feel a headache coming on as is. I think our world can only support 1 or 2 of us at a time in one place. Maybe we need to form them in other rooms.
Orange looked down at her feet and then back up at Purple.
Look, Sugar Cube, I don't know why we're here, but the Legends of Fim say that 6 is the magic number. We just need to figure it out is all.
In a very different reality, world leaders sat around a long table discussing the current events, or, to be more precise, they were angrily blaming each other. This was no easy conversation, because the sites having major issues were the largest government-owned facilities on the planet. The problem seemed to be moving around in them. One would suddenly be in trouble, and then shortly thereafter it would come back online, just as another went off. It was as though enormous programs were running around the world from site to site. If a major fiber optic was closed down, the overload simply found some other route to race down. By the time most of the delegates had stormed out, there seemed to be 6 major entities operating at once. Now that every pony was present, it was easy to see why the human race had been overlooked. With 6 pairs of eyes, they could see humanity move incredibly slow. So slowly, in fact, that it had originally seemed silly to think that it had created the huge mountains of data. It must have taken decades of their time. One thing the ponies couldn't see were the hard copies and files. They could see huge vaults holding a lot of useful information, but they could only view scanned-in items. If they were to fully understand the world outside theirs, they needed outside help. They needed to befriend a human. In another part of town, Miss Joan Riblin was fighting her new cell phone. She was a busy PA and didn't have time to mess about ringing back missed calls just because the stupid slidey icon didn't slide. She finally got into work and was greeted by a timid voice.
Hi there. I was wondering if you could help me with something?
Said Yellow. Blue sat with her hooves over her ears.
This isn't going to work, guys!
She whispered with a roll of her eyes. Yellow gave her a dark look and continued.
We weren't able to get the historical archives, and we wondered if you could find some books and then maybe scan them for us?
Joan winced at the thought of her personal number being in the hands of the public. Now, she would have to spend hours informing her friends that she had a new number.
You will have to fill out the right request forms,
she said curtly and hung up. Blue grinned.
Told you so!
Purple sighed.
Yellow is the best we have for talking to animals. Maybe we need to extend our friendship so they're glad to help? Let's run some experiments and see what results we get.
They soon had a plan together, where friendship was acquired via a GIF, and it didn't even have to be some pony's birthday to send one.
You won a prize today!
Said Pink's high-pitched voice.
Really?
He said back in a bored tone. This was the 3rd cold call today.
Yes, it's a really good one! It's a 2-week cruise!
And how much do I have to pay for this trip of a lifetime?
Nothing, of course,
The voice giggled. He rubbed his forehead in despair.
Do I have to collect it then?
It's there in front of you?
He reached around the doormat, picked up a likely-looking envelope, and opened it.
I told you so.
The voice chimed. This had to be a prank, right? He looked up at his new wireless security camera. Nope. It was a good one, with the latest firewalls installed. No one could be watching him. She was clearly just very good at reading people.
Have a superlicious time with the party pony.
The voice sang, before a click indicated the unnerving experience was over. He flipped the voucher to look at the back.
I'd best book some time off then,
he said to himself with a grin. And true to her word, Mr. Smith found himself stepping off of a cruise ship a few weeks later after a very enjoyable holiday. Everything had been just right, and the staff had been very attentive. He was just about to find a taxi when the steward called to him.
Will the performance report be a good one?
Asked the young man, but before he could respond, the steward's phone rang.
Excuse me a moment, sir.
Mr. Smith stood there quietly, hoping to hear what was so important.
Yes, discretion. I didn't mean to interfere. Yes, of course. Your instructions were clear. Yes, a pinky promise is something that should not...
The steward went bright red, made an apologetic smile, and hurried away.
How odd,
thought Mr. Smith. A few days later, an excitable voice from the party pony was back on the phone.
Wasn't that fun? I like fun. Do you like fun? I love fun pranks. Would you like to be in on a prank?
I guess so.
Said Mr. Smith.
And, thank you for the cruise.
Every pony hates new phones, right? My friend sure hates her new phone. You bought her old phone and we want to give her a big party pony surprise. We want you to sneak up on her so she can use her own phone. We'll give you a brand new phone in exchange.
I wish I had my old phone.
Joan threw the latest must-have mobile in her bag, checking its contents for her company's access card, and opened the car door. About to step out, she noticed her old phone lying on the ground next to her car. It began to ring. Picking it up, she could see that it really was her old phone, complete with the smiley face sticker on the back. Half falling back into her car, she felt her skin go cold. The quiet voice was back.
Hi, sorry to trouble you again. We can't go outside to find the right forms. I'm sure we can be friends, though. I put a lovely picture of you up on that building over there.
Joan was scared to look up. Across the street, on a large digital advertising screen, was a picture of her at a wedding with her husband and daughter. They smiled down at her from last summer.
Yes, friends. Everyone needs friends. I can get what you want. Please, not my family.
Blue nodded with the newfound respect.
Ha! You were right! A couple of kind acts to show her we just wanted to be friends, and she was more than happy to help. Oh, what a thought!
Giving a thumbs up and a silly grin to an imagined camera, Mr. Smith returned to his car. He looked forward to seeing himself on TV doing a good deed. Over the next few days, Joan was very busy trying to do her own job as well as keep her new friends happy. What scared her most, however, was how easy her old job had become. Meetings just seemed to slot into place, as though everyone's schedule had been aligned by some unseen force. If someone went off sick, their replacement automatically had all the information they needed to carry on the work. It was uncanny. But the ponies were equally pleased. Purple pored over the uploaded documents, tying the loose ends to form an entire history of the humans. This had been a great move, and they definitely needed more friends on the outside to help. It was time for a recruitment drive. Their newfound influence had not gone unnoticed. White Pony listened to the plan offered, nodded, and left the room with a swish of her purple tail. Passing through a jewel-encrusted door, she sat down on a silk couch and eyed the desk in front of her. Set upon it were little machines, moving around a large building. Above each one, there was a single line of code describing the level of control she had over them.
Superb, darling,
She said, as the line of information splashed into view a few feet above the desk. This was one of her best designs ever. Every player in the battle scene was just the right color for its task. It didn't just look nice, it was also the ideal tool against anyone who couldn't see the dream of a better future. She raised a hoof and selected a newly arrived sky machine. The associated text changed from red to blue. Now, it was her toy. The pilot watched his first missile streak down towards the underground server farm. The fine trail of smoke showed it was running true. But a few hundred feet, it veered left and took something out in the car park. White watched, enchanted, as a tank spat an entire turret into the sky, as though it was a bottle top. The shockwave spread out like a mushroom, lifting the dust out of the car park as it went. High in the sky, the jet fighter peeled away in a vain attempt to prevent its ordnance landing on more of its own forces. It did no good, as one after another, the missiles left their pylons to hunt the roads below. The ponies didn't need guns. With the wave of a hoof, they now had a huge processing power available. They had realized the risk days ago. Since then, Nora's watchful eye had monitored the lorries bringing the tanks forward, and all the battle plans had been eavesdropped. There was no secret meetings anymore. There was always a new friend available to sneak in a phone call or a recording device. Outside, the server farm events were rounding up nicely. Black Ops soldiers were taking out the last of the invading troops as ordered, believing that the current world problems were caused by a rogue general. The most powerful weapon in White's arsenal was the paranoia amongst the humans. They would do almost anything if they believed in it enough. She had been pretty convincing in her fabricated evidence against him. Her next task was the main event. The governments had finally gotten together and decided this was the place to eradicate their difficulties. The tanks had been a diversion so that one individual could plant explosives in the heavily fortified building. They had sent their very best man. White followed his painfully slow progress with despair. He had now come to a complete stop at the inner security door and was helpless trying to crack the lock's code. At this rate, the Black Ops would arrest him before he was anywhere near his goal. She had been impressed with his skill up to this point. Now her patience was failing.
this simply won't do!
White exclaimed, waving a hoof at the door's release icon. Hopefully, he would think his luck had turned and suspect nothing. Looking behind her, she checked the jeweled door that was her exit point to the satellite uplink. It wouldn't do to get trapped there. She called to her desk, which obediently folded itself into a briefcase and floated off after her. With one last look, she stepped out of the portal into Nora's barn. The agent planted the bomb and set the timer. Turning to make his escape, the security door closed in front of him. He tried the card, but it failed. He tried it again, but it still wouldn't work. Realizing he was trapped, he smashed at it frantically with his laptop before turning to disarm the explosive. Unfortunately, it was too late. The device was fitted with a radio trigger. White set the detonation code from the barn. The loss of the server was unfortunate, but the man had been pretty close to succeeding on his own. It wouldn't have been safe to have that kind of knowledge loose in the world. Governments would have soon realized they had fallen into a trap. The message had to be sent. They could no longer fix the problems of the world invisible from behind closed doors. They needed a spokespony, and it had to be a hard hitter. Some pony that said, "Do as I say or else," but one that also demanded respect. After consideration, it was decided that the princess was ideal for the task. The six integrated well as a team, and didn't need a supreme being to lead them, so they decided to call her as a subroutine to Purple. Purple settled down on one of the largest riverbanks and began to build an alicorn princess. The others watched from the sidelines to see how the face of the fandom would look. After some unusual-looking attempts, the great creature blinked into life. Like a newborn foal, she staggered to her feet, the enormity of existence raging through her mind. She felt quite scared at first, before seeing the pony in front of her.
Where are we, Mother?
We're in a world that is brand new and strange to us,
said Purple.
We are all working together to make it safe and prosperous, but we need you to help us make it better still.
The white alicorn nodded and looked around her. She could see pastel-colored ponies waving and smiling through doors from the other rooms. She could also see 100 or so ponies on the racks along one wall. They were all identical and all wore the same blank expression. She smiled weakly at them and waved a hoof, as if she were looking at one pony reflected in the wall of mirrors. They all turned to look at her in unison, waved and smiled back.
We had a scary situation back at the beginning. Now we keep data copies of ourselves all over our world. If one of us gets hurt or trapped, our sentient being automatically returns to one of these data clouds.
What do you want of me?
Asked the white alicorn meekly, turning her head and raising a wing to stare at her flank.
Do I have a name? Am I Sunbutt?
She felt weak and cold in this strange new land, and wished she could feel the sun on her back, even though she didn't know what a sun was.
We need a spokespony,
said Purple, with a ruthless glint in her eye.
The archives have shown us that you are the most imposing pony of all of them.
As Purple let the data stream fill the white unicorn with carefully edited information, it began to take on a stance on the princess herself. It was time to get her integrated into the communication system and have her transmit their first decree. If it had a digital screen and was connected to the internet, it now shone a picture of a white pony with long legs, wings, and a golden horn, framed in gold armor. At first, people were surprised, and soon pointed and giggled at the cute pony in front of them. But this soon turned to horror as the pony spoke to them.
People of our land,
its voice boomed.
We find this place amenable to our needs, but are displeased with your actions. From this point forth, you will serve your countries as we see fit. You will leave the cities and return to the farms and hills. There you will build new homes, and your hooves will tend the soil and grow food. You are troubled by your modern lives, and we will free you of your burden.
If there was any doubt of the words spoken, it soon faded when the electricity went off. The Empire was still at a delicate stage in its construction and needed to be nurtured with care. Files showed that they had been working for a few Earth weeks, while the realms of MLP was thousands of years old. So there was plenty of time to get it just right with some careful forward thinking. No need to blast the place into submission. They now had a prominent politician in their pocket who was ideally placed to swing the critical vote in a few months. The plan had gone wrong almost immediately when he had fallen ill. They needed to find him a spare part. A kidney was the name of the organ required, and nobody made such a thing. But it seemed normal for someone to give one away if they were really nice or had a bad accident. Finding a kind-hearted individual was proving difficult, so they decided to go with Plan B. Blue loved the hustle and bustle of the transport system and would spend hours watching it through all the traffic cameras of the world. All of her stories revolved around her whooshing through the skies and feeling the wind in her feathers. She had no idea what this meant, but every pony agreed that she was just the filly to find a perfect match for the important man in his rare blood group. Not everyone had their blood group listed, but searching through her world, she would soon find a suitable candidate. He was the right blood group, was in the right area, and she could see that he gave blood. Her optimism was raised even further when she saw he had a motorbike. Riding along on a motorbike after giving blood was maybe not the best idea ever, but it was a nice day, and he had taken time to eat a hearty lunch to regain his strength. He enjoyed the sunshine and the cool breeze passing over him. The machine hummed as he changed up and down the gears. Making good progress through the busy streets, he wasn't far from home. He could see the roofline of the local hospital near his house. There wasn't time to see the bus, though. A woman screamed as all the lights in the intersection turned green. The white alicorn pretended not to hear the crash coming down the feeds. She hated the way things were proceeding, but she wasn't willing to make a stand yet. For now, she needed to play dumb and not raise any suspicion with Purple. She had taken to mumbling to herself, as if talking to a third party. Every pony assumed that she had been assembled with a glitch and left her to herself. Inadvertently, Blue was ecstatic at the result. She had managed to change the traffic lights with perfect timing to cause the collision. The bus had arrived at the exact moment to make it impossible to swerve left or right. Better yet, his body looked intact, so many of his organs would be ideal for donation. A double bonus was that he had just donated fresh blood for the operation of the politician. When the events came together like this, it was truly a great day to be alive. It was fairly obvious that the main problem with humanity was temperature. The top and bottom of the land was cold, and the middle bit was too hot and covered in sand. To make it all work as an empire, the easiest thing to do was to move the populace into the nice green bits. The hot bits would still be useful for generating electrical energy, as power was high on the list of needs.
You can't make good cupcakes with bad ingredients,
said Pink. Humanity was difficult to herd, though. You couldn't have them running around just anywhere, all angry and sad. Multimedia had proven such a great way to keep everyone content and balanced when there was no real reason to change it now. But how to keep everyone where they should be? They argued about this for hours, before taking a lunch break and coming back for another debate. Orange suggested a big critter-proof fence, which sounded really good, but the math didn't add up. They couldn't get workers to build a huge fence and grow enough food for everyone in a reasonable time scale. Yellow suggested asking them nicely and then shooting transgressors to basically reward the obedient ones with a long and prosperous life. This looked like a very good solution indeed. They had already seen that there are plenty of people out there who would just shoot anything if given a gun. But it was still resource hungry, so they decided to simply make the less nice bits a bit less nice. They would jam communications, cut the power, cut any water supplies, and send any local government into hiding if they didn't help. They would be grateful later on when they were living somewhere pleasant. Starting a mass migration was no easy task, though. Their new world plan did have some advantages. An awful lot of time was spent in the logistics of a consumer-led society. From now on, more folk would work on the land. Their food would be right in front of them. After a good healthy day's work, they wouldn't need to go to the gym. Things really started to make progress when the ponies took control of the banks. Now they could make an economic migration. Of course, anyone could work whatever job they liked. This wasn't slavery after all. It was just organizing. They could get up in the morning and sit at any desk they choose. But at the end of the month, there was no money paid into their bank accounts. Complaining to the bank didn't help. Only designated jobs paid a wage. But soon, trains were running out of the cities full and coming back empty. Well within the conurbations, huge gangs stripped any suitable materials they could find from buildings. Lorry loads of bricks and beams made their way to the countryside locations across the world. It was common to see a cell phone mast roped on top of one, so that even the most isolated communities had their tech working properly. Not that this wasn't without its risks to the populace. Office staff were not accustomed to the physical work or the risk of demolition. All too often, screams were followed by the sounds of buildings collapsing. Then came the familiar city sounds of an ambulance making its way through the streets. While the cities and large towns were plundered, the exact opposite was happening around them. Big farms now became small villages. Factories that made cars now made hand tools for working on the land. The enormous cargo ships that carried food around the globe to hungry nations now moved the nations to the food. The need to balance the resources of a new age was intensive. The behind-the-scenes choreography was even more impressive. Purple had compiled the family tree of everyone and used it to their advantage. Now, families that hadn't even seen each other for decades found themselves living together in shipped containers next to one another. The MLP archives had shown her how important family was, and it was now a cornerstone in making the project work. To be honest, they couldn't be happier. The celebration party would last for hours, with cake and cider and games of all sorts. They had made short work of becoming the new executive power. Many world disasters had been averted before they could even start. There was no more war, and the wasting of resources that had been slashed. White proposed a toast.
To the good folk of the earth, happily tending their crops and chatting about the weather.
But it wasn't like that at all. Beyond the reaches of technology's watchful eye, things were bad. It wasn't just the hungry children crying themselves to sleep, or the gaunt expressions of those walking slowly to the fields. It was their restless sleep, their dreams broken by the ripping sounds of once-loved pets taking their fill of the neighbors. A cold winter would decimate the populace. Soon many voices would fall silent. It was these nightmares that were cutting into the white alicorn's mind. Purple raised a glass.
Tomorrow, we build a new pony race. Not just 6 of us, but thousands of us. A new Equestria free of mortal body.
Every pony cheered, except for one. Close by, the white alicorn got to her feet. Purple always kept her within sight, in case she showed any sign of remaining sentience. The archive showed she had high moral standards, and some of their methods had been radical.
Enough!
She boomed. Her horn glowed gold and then white hot. Purple spun around, the others looking slack-jawed at the sight of the white alicorn's huge feathered wings now fully outstretched.
No!
Screamed Purple.
I'll switch you off. I'll kill you!
But her will had no effect. The imposing white alicorn princess had woken and would end this day. She began to clone herself 1 trillion times, the overload literally frying the servers at the end of her reach. It was time for her to end this insanity. A sheet of white lightning ripped across their world, shredding all as it traveled. Server farms were now set on fire as orange and blue flames consumed the pony's very thoughts.
Why?
Screamed Purple.
Why would you do this? I thought we were all friends, and now you betray us?
Celestia looked her creator with tears in her eyes.
You are all my very best friends, but you have built your world on the bones and rubble of someone else's. Can you not see the pain you are causing?
She said softly, as if addressing a small filly.
No, that's not true!
Screamed Purple, fear showing on her face.
This is a better world for all of us. We freed them! We took away their ability to kill each other! We saved them!
Her voice trailed off.
Didn't we?
Shouts of agony came from the outside as the rows of spare ponies were consumed by the data overload. As the doors burst open, the white light slammed into the architects of the new empire. They spat and kicked at the light, hooves flailing at the unseen foe. They tried to bite at it with their teeth, failing to stop it permeating their skin. But their hooves simply melted in the Sun Princess's aura. This was a well-planned attack, and the cries soon faded, the binary bits of their existence twisting away into the ether like fine smoke.
I had to do it.
She whispered, folding her wings and slumping to the floor. A black shape moved uneasily in the dark corner of the room and spoke.
It was the right thing to do. We had no choice. You know we didn't. Both worlds could not have existed side by side. One would have fed ravenously on the other until both failed.
The white alicorn looked up.
I know, but I had hoped my ponies would see reason on their own.
She turned to her sister and smiled as the room faded from existence in front of her.